إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم خذ من أموالهم صدقة تطهرهم وتزكيهم بها وصل عليهم إن صلاتك سكن لهم والله سميع عليم. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, we begin by praising Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his companions, and upon all those who have treaded in their footsteps of righteousness and piety. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He make us from those who follow in their teachings and their practices. Ameen. In last week's khutbah, we began the topic of zakat. Considering that many of us pay our zakat during the month of Ramadan, we felt it was very important to go over the basic bylaws of paying the zakat, so that when we give the zakat, number one, we are executing our responsibility of giving the zakat correctly, and secondly, that we are giving the zakat in a manner where it is in line with everything which needs to be considered. So a few things that we covered last week. We went over what zakat is, the purpose of zakat, the definition of zakat. We went over upon whom zakat is necessary. And we also covered briefly the types of wealth upon which zakat is necessary. Today we'll be continuing on with that, but I don't want to spend the entire khutbah just focusing on the zakat. We are in the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan, and we do want to speak a little bit about that, just so we are aware of the tremendous value of these last 10 nights, and so that inshallah we can take maximum benefit from these last 10 nights. But to quickly wrap up what we were discussing about zakat, types of wealth on which zakat is fard. In essence, what this is anything which has any sort of inherent or monetary value to it. So gold, silver, all these things have an inherent value. Likewise, money as well, obviously, we have to give zakat on it. Anything which is used part of our business, which generates wealth, which generates income, a business commodity. Anything which is personal, there is no zakat on it. So you can have 10 cars, and all your 10 cars can be for your personal leisure and for your personal use. There's no zakat on your 10 cars. On the other hand, if you have 3 cars and all 3 of these cars are used to rent out to people, and they're your business cars, right? You generate a business from these 3 cars. You will have to pay zakat on them. Why? Because now they are part of your business commodity. When we were speaking about gold and silver, any other type of jewelry is excluded. So rubies, precious stones, any other types of metal, there's no zakat on any of these kinds of things. Only on gold and silver. Now, moving quickly forward, we want to go over the nisab. We were speaking about the nisab a lot last week, that if a person has the nisab amount, then they are required to give the zakat. And if a person has less than nisab, then they are eligible to receive the zakat. So what exactly is the nisab amount? When we look at the nisab is, in other words, the threshold, or the quantum, which either makes us obligated to give the zakat or makes us eligible to receive the zakat. Now, when we look at the nisab, there's two standards we can use. There's the gold standard, and then there is the silver standard. Why? Because both of them have intrinsic value. And when you look at the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stipulated zakat for both gold and silver. He stipulated a certain amount for gold and a certain amount for silver. And as we know that gold and silver are not of the same value, that if you have 1 ounce of gold and 1 ounce of silver, the 1 ounce of gold will be much more valuable than the 1 ounce of silver. So because of that, the standard of the nisab is very, very different. Just to give you an idea, if you go by the nisab, if you go by the threshold of the gold standard, right? If you're saying that I'm going to use gold to determine whether or not I have to give zakat, or I'm going to use gold whether or not to determine whether I'm going to receive zakat, then the number you're looking at, the figure that you're looking at is around $3,500, right? $3,500 if you're using gold. On the flip side, if you're using silver as your standard to determine whether or not you have to give zakat or you're eligible for zakat, then it's a very, very lower number. The figure then goes to $340, around that figure, right? If you go on websites, there's a number of Islamic institution websites, you go on there, they'll give you the exact figure, the exact nisab amount for that very day, based on the current market value and price for gold and silver. So you can notice the huge difference if you use gold and if you use silver to determine your nisab. So as the general public, what do we do, right? Obviously, we don't have only gold assets, and obviously we don't have only silver assets. We have a mix of assets. In fact, many of us don't own much gold or silver. Many of us, our majority of our wealth comprises of money. So in that instance, what do we do? The scholars have mentioned in that situation, the best is to use the standard which will benefit the poor the most, right? Because the purpose of zakat, as we mentioned, is sadaqatan, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, is a way of charity, of helping the people who are in need of it. So to use the figure which helps the needy the most is the best. In other words, use the amount for silver, right? For all of us, we should be using the silver amount because inshallah, it's better for us. And I'm pretty sure majority of us already have the gold nisab regardless, right? So either way, it doesn't really matter. But in a situation where you don't have the gold nisab amount, but you do have the silver nisab amount, it's better to go with that, right? It's better to go with that because now there's more benefit to the people who need the zakat. On the flip side, the scholars mention that if you are eligible for zakat, right, you have to ask yourself, because now you can use either gold or nisab, right? Some people may be eligible for zakat if they go with the silver nisab, the silver amount. Other people may be eligible for zakat only if they use the gold amount. At that point, you have to ask yourself that, do I really need the zakat money? If I do, then go with the silver nisab, right? Silver standard. But in the other situation where you say, I have enough wealth, there are other people in the community who need it more than me, then go with the gold nisab, right? So that's a brief overview of how to determine which standard to use when you are giving your zakat. And as we mentioned, majority of us, alhamdulillah, and again, this is a big blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are eligible to give zakat, right? Many of us already have $3,500 worth of assets, right? So there's no question of, am I going to use the silver or gold? It then boils down to the same exact thing. Now, quickly moving on to a few other important aspects of zakat. We want to go over the method of paying the zakat, right? A few points. Zakat should be given as soon as possible, right? You can delay it. Yes, you can. You can wait till the month of Ramadan. But it's always best to give the zakat as soon as it's necessary. And as we mentioned, that you should have a certain day, right? A certain time during the year where you calculate your zakat. If every year you're changing that number up, it gets very, very confusing. So if you have one day, let's say during the month of Ramadan is the month when you're going to calculate and give your zakat, then keep the month of Ramadan for the rest of your life. It'll make your life so much easier, right? Zakat must be paid on loans as well. In other words, if you've borrowed some, if you've lended, right? If you've lent $40,000 to someone, you are responsible for giving zakat on that $40,000. As long as you know the person's going to give it back to you. Now if the person comes back and says they're bankrupt, they have no way of giving it back to you, and you forgive the person for that debt, then you're no longer responsible for giving that zakat. Because why? That money is never going to come back to you. But if the person is paying you back, if the person has sufficient assets and he's making his monthly payments, then you are responsible for paying zakat on all your loans. In other words, all the money that you've lended out to people. That also brings us to the question of investments, and many of us have IRAs or 401ks or whatever the case. You give zakat on that, right? There's difference of opinion as far as the scholars are concerned on when you should give zakat. No one is saying that if you have a 401k, you don't ever have to give zakat. Rather, what the difference is when do you give the zakat? Do you give the zakat when you have, do you give the zakat when you pull out all your funds from the 401k? Or do you give the zakat even before that? That's the difference of opinion. No scholar is saying, or no one is saying that if you have money in your 401k or IRA or whatever retirement plan, that there's no zakat on it. There's always zakat on your assets. It's just when do you have to give it? The best opinion, in my opinion, is because you have that asset, because you have that wealth, you should give zakat on it every year, right? There are other opinions where they say that because you don't have access to that wealth, therefore you don't have to give zakat on it, and you have to give zakat once you pull out the money. But it's very similar to a loan. If someone borrowed money from you, you don't have access to that money immediately, but you still have to give zakat on that money. Now, moving to personal loans. If you have a loan, if you have a mortgage payment, if you have a car loan, whatever the case, how do you calculate that as far as your assets, right? So there's two types of loans. There's one type of loan where you pay in installments. And then you have the second type of loan where it's due immediately, right? You have to give it immediately. So let's say you have a loan of, you have a debt of $10,000, right? And that debt of $10,000 is due next week, the entire amount. Then you take that $10,000 and you subtract it from your entire asset, right? If that $10,000 exceeds whatever money you have and it puts you in negative, or basically completely wipes out your assets, then you have no zakat to give, right? And remember, when you're giving your zakat, when you're calculating, you have to calculate, you have to minus your monthly expenses. So if you have $10,000 in your bank account at this point, and your monthly expenses are $5,000, then you deduct that $5,000 and you give zakat only on that $5,000, right? The remaining $5,000. Then if we bring the loan into the picture, that debt that we have, and we see that we have $10,000 in debt and we only have $5,000 in assets, then obviously we're in the negative, so we don't have to give zakat. In the second situation, where the debt is paid in installments, you have a mortgage, you have a car loan, right? Where every month you have to give a certain figure. Now that monthly installment will then be added on to your monthly expenses, right? You're not going to calculate the entire amount. If your mortgage payment if your entire debt for your house is $500,000, you're not going to consider that $500,000 as your when you're calculating your zakat. Only your monthly payment. If your monthly payment is $5,000 in your house, you're going to consider that $5,000, that immediate amount that is due, right? So that's as far as calculating our personal loans, our personal debts are concerned. Now, a very important aspect in the zakat is to whom can zakat be given, right? In brief, zakat is intended to help out the less fortunate, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outlined 7 categories in the Quran. Because we are very short on time, we don't have the leisure to get into each and every single one of these categories. But in essence, zakat is intended primarily to help out the people that are needy. So the first 2 categories, the fuqara and masakin, there's a slight difference between the two. The fuqara are people who who do not have assets sufficient to the nisab amount, right? So as we went over that, you have the nisab amount of, if you go with silver, then $340. A person who does not have $340, a person who does not have even that amount, that person is eligible for zakat. That person is called, is part of the fuqara. Then you have the masakin. The masakin are the people who have nothing at all. They're destitute. They're homeless, forget about having money, or, they may have a home, but you go into their home, they don't have basic necessities, they don't have a fridge, they don't have appliances, then they fall in the category of masakin. So all these types of people are eligible for zakat. We have many Syrian refugees in our community. They most likely should be eligible for zakat. Most likely, right? Now, are you allowed to give zakat to institutions and organizations? That's a very important question. Many people ask, are you allowed to give zakat to organizations and institutions? If that institution is collecting your zakat and then distributing it to the poor, you can give it, right? So you have all these different organizations that collect money and then they distribute those funds to people who need it. In that situation, you can give your zakat, because what they're doing in essence is being the middleman. They're just distributing your zakat for you. If there's an organization that is, whatever it may be, it's not doing that, where your money is not being distributed to either one of the fuqara or the masakin, then to give zakat to them, it's better not to do. Again, there's been a difference of opinion. Some scholars have said that you can give zakat to institutions, to schools, to other things like that, but the dominant position still remains that you cannot give your zakat to organizations, institutions, which also includes masajid. Then moving forward, individuals who are not eligible to receive zakat. You cannot give zakat to the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? There's a lot of people who have the last name is Sayyid, right? That's great. If you cannot prove that you're from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you don't have a family tree or a lineage, then there's a lot of people with the name Sayyid, right? But people who are from the direct descendants of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam are not eligible to receive zakat. You cannot give zakat to your immediate antecedents. In other words, you can't give zakat to your parents, your grandparents. You can't give zakat to, likewise, you can't give zakat to your children, your grandchildren, right? A husband and wife cannot give each other zakat. You can't do that, right? And then there's something people do that, how like people do tax fraud? There's zakat fraud as well, where the husband tells the wife, you own all my money, right? And then, I have no more money left, so I can't give zakat. And then the wife says, now you can have, if the wife gives it back, then you're lucky. If not, then, too bad. So don't do zakat fraud, please. But that's pretty much as far as zakat is concerned, inshallah. I think we covered everything. If you have any other specific questions, then feel free to meet me afterwards. But with that being said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand the purpose of zakat, the importance of zakat. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to give the zakat in its whole, in its entirety. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to purify our wealth with the zakat. Ameen. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن المجيد ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر وأشدهم في أمر الله تعالى عمر وأصدقهم حياء عثمان وأقضاهم علي وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين. Before we move on, just another very important thing about giving the zakat. When you're giving your zakat, it has to be the exact amount, right? You can't just go with a ballpark summary. If you know that ballpark sum exceeds the amount of zakat you have to give, then that's fine, if you're 100% sure. But you can't just, pay a lump sum amount and you're in doubt whether or not it actually exceeds your zakat or not, right? If let's just say you have to give $1,482 in zakat. You can't just say, I'll just give, $1,400 in zakat, right? Because now you have that $82 that's left. On the other hand, if you say, I'll just give $1,500, that's fine. So if you're giving a lump sum amount, as long as you know that it exceeds your zakat, that's fine. But when you're in doubt, does it really, just to make numbers even, then you can't do that. If everyone can just move up, jazakallah khair. So with that being said, we know that we are now in the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan. And on the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan, the entire month of Ramadan itself is a very beautiful, it's a very virtuous night. It's a very virtuous month. It's a month wherein all our deeds, all our good actions are multiplied and rewarded, right? As the hadith of Rasulullah says that the month of Ramadan is the month wherein the first 10 days, the second 10 days, and the third 10 days each have their distinct features. Some of the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan, the distinct feature of it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frees many, many people from the fire of Jahannam, right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those people who do not have to experience anything related to the fire of Jahannam. Ameen. So that is the significant aspect of the last 10 nights of Ramadan. Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that during the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan, the dua which she would recite in abundance is Allahumma innaka afu tuhibbul afwa fa'afu anni ya kareem. Allahumma innaka afu tuhibbul afwa fa'afu anni ya kareem. Allahumma innaka afu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are the most forgiving. Afu refers to a person who keeps on forgiving you, who keeps on pardoning you, right? Who keeps on forgiving you, excusing you. Tuhibbul afwa. And you love to excuse and you love to forgive. Allahumma innaka afu tuhibbul afwa fa'afu anni ya kareem. So therefore, excuse, forgive me. Therefore, forgive my sins. Right, so this was a dua which during the last 10 nights, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Aisha radiallahu anha, they recite this dua in abundance. Right. Additionally, during the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan, there is a much higher chance of any of these nights being the night of Qadr, Laylatul Qadr, as we know in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَلْفِ شَهْرٍ, that it is better than 1,000 months. Right, 1,000 months equals to about 83 years roughly, right? The reward of a person doing any good deed during the night of Qadr is that they will receive the reward of doing that deed for 83 years. So imagine during the night of Qadr you give $10 in sadaqah. In other words, the reward you'll get is as though you've given sadaqah of that $10 for the next 83 years. Right, subhanAllah, just doing that one small thing. So the last 10 nights, there's a higher chance of Laylatul Qadr. And more importantly, during any of the last 10 nights, right? Because the scholars have differed as far as when the last 10 nights, when Laylatul Qadr can actually definitely occur. In fact, the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that once the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was coming out to inform the ummah, to inform the Sahaba radiallahu anhum of when the night of Qadr would be. And as he came out from his house, he saw that there were two people arguing with one another. And because of that, he was not given the exact date or the exact time when the night of Qadr would be. What the scholars mention from this is that arguing and fighting with one another is such a big deal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's such a big crime to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He deprived us from the knowledge of when the night of Qadr is. And that leads us to a very important thing, that if we have some sort of arguments or disagreements with any of our relatives, especially our family members, this is those last 10 nights to now reconciliate. It's now to make amends. It's now the time where we have to call one another and say, we've had our differences, we've had our arguments, whatever the case. Let's just put that aside and continue with our lives. This is that time. Because imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not reveal the date and time of the night of Qadr because of two people arguing. It's a very, very big deal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it should be a big deal for us. If we have brothers and sisters, unfortunately we know people where brothers and brothers don't talk to one another, right? If you have a brother or a sister or a family member that you're not talking to right now, right? We're not saying that again, you have to understand that there's a balance. Not everyone's going to get along with one another. Sometimes siblings don't get along with one another. You're just very different. We're not saying you have to become best friends now. We're just saying if you've held a grudge against someone, if you haven't spoken to someone for the past 3 years, why? Because you're so angry at them. Just give them a call, say, Assalamu alaikum, how are you, what's going on? That's it. You don't have to say, let's become best friends. It's not about that. The essence is, don't hold grudges against anyone. Don't have animosity or hatred towards anyone. Right? So that's another very important thing. That during the last 10 days, if you hold any sort of grudge or hatred against someone, then make this that time where you forgive them. You call them, just say, let's just put this aside, whatever the case. So going back to the night of Qadr, when exactly is it? The scholars have different opinions. There's nothing concrete in the Sunnah. However, many of the Sahaba radhiyallahu anhum have said, Sahaba such as Abdullah ibn Masud radhiyallahu anhu, he said that the 27th night is the night of Qadr. Are we 100% certain or not? But if you can say 85%, then the 27th night. But nevertheless, that 15% is a very, very big gap. Therefore, every single night of the last 10 days of Ramadan can be the night of Qadr, and we should definitely take full advantage of it. A few things we can do is we can participate in the qiyam that takes place in our masjid. We have the qiyam which starts at 2:30 every morning, and we finish around 3:15. Then there's suhoor provided, right? So you don't have to go back home to eat suhoor. So inshallah, that's definitely something we can participate in. Because imagine, you pray your tahajjud, your qiyam, during the night of Qadr, that's like praying for 83 years. If you have some sort of contribution or zakat or some sort of sadaqah you want to give, spread that out to the next 10 nights, right? Because if you spread it out, there's a much, how they say, diversify your wealth, right? You're diversifying your investments at that point, right? And make lots of dua, right? Those are just a few tips and pointers for the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan, so that we can take full advantage of it. And with that being said, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه ولا تكفرون أقيموا الصلاة